welcome everyone to the launch of the revised Bopha or Pablo Response Action Plan for Recovery. It gives me great pleasure to acknowledge Secretary Soliman from the Department of Social Welfare and Development, who's with us here today, as well as Ms. Luiza Carvalho, the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for the Philippines. I also welcome distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, friends and colleagues from the humanitarian community, and I'd also very much like to thank Assistant Secretary Ben Yes from the Department of Foreign Affairs for hosting us here today in this magnificent room. Today we will hear statements from 4 members of the panel, who, in addition to Secretary Soliman and Ms. Carvalho, also include Mr. Snehal Sonyeji, who is representing the PINGON, or the Philippine International NGO Network, as well as Ms. Octavia Borthwick, who is the Minister Councillor of AUSAID. On that note, I'd like to ask if Assistant Secretary Ben Yes would like to make a few remarks to formally open the event.
Thank you, David, and good morning, Honorable Secretary Soliman, of course, Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator Ms. Carvalho, Mr. Sineji and Ms. Borthwick, Excellencies from the Diplomatic Corps, our friends and partners from the humanitarian community, colleagues in government and civil society. On behalf of Secretary Albert Del Rosario, I'd like to welcome you, of course, to the Department of Foreign Affairs for this very important event, the revised action plan for recovery. And I just returned actually from Geneva with Secretary Soliman, who was able to personally meet Undersecretary General Valerie Amos, as well as the other humanitarian partners based in Geneva. There was an interagency standing committee meeting at which Secretary Soliman presented the latest updates on this particular Typhoon Bopha or Pablo activities. And there was a very good exchange of information in Geneva. And this particular event, of course, follows on from that dialogue. And it is the Department of Foreign Affairs' privilege to be able to host this event. As you all know, our country has the unfortunate circumstance of having to experience these disasters, and the latest unfortunate event that happened in the southern Philippines is, of course, just another example of how the Philippines continues to suffer from extreme weather events and disasters. And of course, it is hoped that even while suffering continues, the processes by which our country is able to recover in cooperation with our humanitarian development partners is a process that is transparent and is able to quickly deliver the assistance needed by our affected countrymen. So once again, on behalf of the Department of Foreign Affairs, I'd like to welcome you all over here and hope that the exchange of information this morning will convince you that all the financial assistance and humanitarian assistance is being put to good use, and will convince you also to continue rendering your good help to the citizens of the Philippines. So thank you again, and I'll turn it over to David to continue the program.
Thank you very much, Asaged. I'd now like to give the floor to Snell, representing Bangkok.
Secretary Soliman, Octavia, Luiza, and the resident humanitarian coordinator, distinguished guests. A very good morning to you. I represent the Philippine INGO network, which comprises of 22 international non-governmental organizations operating in the Philippines. First of all, on behalf of all the INGOs, we would like to thank all the donor countries who have contributed so generously to the first phase of the response, both to the action plan as well as to the individual organizations as well. As you may have seen from the 3Ws map that was circulated yesterday by OCHA, PINGON members, along with its local partners, are working in coordination with both the government of the Philippines and the UN agencies, and are equal partners in this effort of serving affected communities in all areas of Compostela Valley, the Oriental and Surigao del Sur. PINGON members are also part of every cluster, and we are working closely with the cluster leads and co-leads. And the typhoon has taken a heavy toll on shelter and crop-based livelihoods of the region. As you are all well aware, with the launch of this action plan, we are hopeful that we will be able to raise enough funds to address significant challenges that remain. We look forward to donor governments around the world responding generously in this challenging global environment, so that the affected population in the country can be supported to put a roof over their heads, recover their livelihoods, and help them and get back to their feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Snell. And I'd like to ask Ms. Octavia Borthwick, the Minister Councillor of AusAid, to deliver a few remarks. And Octavia was also one of the donor representatives on the recent mission to the affected areas in Compostela Valley and Davao Oriental last week.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning, Secretary Soliman, Luiza, and to all the distinguished guests here this morning. I would just again like to take this opportunity on behalf of the Australian Government to express my sympathies to all the Filipino people who remain suffering as a result of this disaster, which has affected, as we know, so many people and taken so many lives and caused extensive damage to housing and livelihoods. And of course, the floods recently have exacerbated the situation, and we very much sympathise with all the affected people. Australia, as a close friend of the Philippines, is supporting the Philippine government efforts to provide the relief and recovery needs. Our support has been providing food, safe drinking water and temporary shelters to thousands of the affected families, and will provide support to people with disabilities. We very much commend the Philippine government for its preparedness and response to this, and we will continue, of course, to work with the government and other partners so they can draw on Australian assistance as needed. As David mentioned, I and Ambassador Bill Tadell from the Australian Embassy participated in last week's joint mission to the typhoon-affected areas. And I think what really struck many of us was just the enormous resilience shown by the people we met in the evacuation camps and in those areas. Seeing it firsthand, we were really struck by the extent of the devastation caused by the typhoon and just the sheer numbers of people affected and just the geographic coverage of the damage. We spoke to a lot of people in those evacuation camps, and many of them, as I said, we were very impressed by their resilience and their will to rebuild their lives again. But also, most of them said to us that they really just wanted to go home. So really that was the message that we came away with from so many of those people. We understand that there are still a lot of needs just in terms of the emergency shelter required, quite aside from the longer term needs of resettlement in the area. And I think we understood that the recovery effort will be quite a long one. You know, this will be something that these needs will be ongoing for some time. Again, I'd like to stress how impressed I was by the coordination taking place between the national government, the local government, the donor community, the UN family, and the NGO community, and how well that's working. And I think that's a testament to the enormous effort being put in and the very strong lead by Secretary Soliman for that effort. Just a few other observations. The Australian aid program is very much active in the education field, and I did note the huge destruction of schools across the affected areas, and how important it will be to rebuild those schools, to give the children normality in their lives, and to help them rebuild their lives. And we'll be looking at, through our own program, how we can help support that effort. And also, I think it was clear just the importance of disaster preparedness, given the range of natural disasters that strike the Philippines, and how important it's going to be to help support that planning effort to help avoid the same kinds of problems in future. With respect to the revised appeal today, we look forward to hearing more about it and to considering positively the needs that will be the donor community will be asked to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Octavia. I'd now like to invite Luiza Carvalho, United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for the Philippines, to deliver a few remarks.
Secretary Soliman, Assistant Secretary Mendes, Mr. Otávio Brunswick, Mr. Juliano-Soliman, colleague David Carden, Excellence from Government, Diplomat Community, colleagues from the UN, heads of agencies, and from the National International Humanitarian Community. Dear colleagues from the media, good morning. Thank you for joining us here today and for this opportunity to present the revised Typhoon Bopha Pablo response, an action plan for recovery to the esteemed audience. Firstly, I would like to extend my thanks to the Department of Foreign Affairs for hosting us here today. I would also like to thank Secretary Soliman, with whom I'm joined in launching the appeal. As the powerful images we have seen here earlier convey, the path of destruction left in a wake of Typhoon Bopha is immense. As many of you will be aware, we traveled some of the worst hit areas in the days and weeks immediately after the storm, and a group of donors went to the same places last week. We're all profoundly shocked by what we saw. Entire villages devastated or swept away. Hundreds of thousands of lives changed forever. In the weeks since Pablo hit southern Mindanao, the breadth and extension of the damage has become even clearer. More than 1 month on, over 6.2 million people have been affected, and close to 850,000 remain displaced. More than 210,000 houses, vital public infrastructure, and vast tracts of agricultural land has been severely damaged or destroyed. More than 1.60 lives were lost, and over 800 others are still missing. Typhoon Pablo was the most deadly storm globally in 2012, and reportedly the most powerful to hit southern Mindanao in more than 100 years. It had 3 times the wind speed and double the rainfall of tropical storm Sendon, which devastated northern Mindanao in 2011. Just a point for comparison, when Hurricane Sandy hit the coast of the United States in October last year, it was rated a Category 1. Pablo was Category 5 super typhoon, which hit villages and vulnerable farming communities. When talking about numbers this big, it can sometimes be difficult to fully comprehend, but it is important to remember that these are families, mothers, daughters, fathers, and sons, whose lives have been irreparably damaged, and whose urgently need our support. They are the human face of this emergency. Today, on behalf of the humanitarian community in the Philippines, I'm asking for 76 million to provide immediate life-saving assistance to survivors of the Typhoon Pablo and to help families on the path to restoring their livelihoods. The amount represents a 70% increase from the 65 million requested on the 10th of December at the onset of the disaster. As I mentioned on the occasion of the first appeal launched in Davao, one of the things that strike us is, just mentioned by Ms. Otavia, is the remarkable positive can-do spirit of the Filipino people. Over the last few weeks, we have seen that spirit at every level, from local volunteers donating their time or personal resources to the municipal, provincial, regional, and national response group. The spirit, expertise, and commitment I have witnessed is truly impressive. The leadership and personal commitment of Secretary Soliman, in particular, should be commended, as well as the action coordinated by the civil defense. And together, we have witnessed the first signs of hope and progress over the last few weeks. Working in support to the government of the Philippines, the United Nations, and the wider humanitarian community has provided assistance to tens of thousands of people. This includes life-saving food aid, emergency shelter, water and hygiene kits to minimize the risk of disease outbreaks. Cash for work programs are also being implemented in communities to empower people to support their families. However, the magnitude of the disaster demands more, and the funding and resources we have at the present are not commensurate with the needs that we must meet. Thus far, 36% of the 76 million we required for the response has been received, 30% by the UN agencies and 70% by the NGOs. The United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund, CERF, has allocated 10 million to provide immediate life-saving assistance. Pledges, commitments, and contributions from donors, including United States, Australia, Japan, European Union, Canada, Spain, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others, New Zealand and others, have provided an additional 70 million. Today, we are asking for continued funding to cover a gap of $48 million. I'm deeply thankful to the donors for their contributions so far, in particular to this difficult economic climate and with so many crises around the world demanding our attention. However, we need much stronger support if we are to meet the basic needs of those affected and to help them on the road of recovery. The revised action plan outlines plan for how the humanitarian community, with the government of the Philippines in the lead, will continue to provide both immediate life-saving assistance and early recovery support to the most affected people in Mindanao over the coming 6 months. The appeal seeks your support for 46 projects in 12 humanitarian areas. I'm confident that we can excel in achieving these objectives set out in this response plan if we are fully funded. As far as today, the priority humanitarian needs are durable shelters and identification of resettlement sites for communities vulnerable to flood and landslides, food security and agriculture, ensuring access to water, sanitation and hygiene services, as well as early recovery and reestablishment of livelihood for affected communities. Another set of needs, and no less important than that, are protection, health, nutrition, education, and others. For the early recovery and livelihood cluster, we are requesting a combined 17 million for food security and agriculture, 10 million is split. 8 agencies from shelter clusters are asking for 11.5 million, and in the area of WASH, 4 million is requested. The need for shelter in particular remains critical. With approximately 216,000 homes destroyed or damaged by Pablo, the need for emergency and durable shelter is critical. In the most affected communities, people are residing in spontaneous settlement on the remains of their former homes, and some are living in the side of the roads. We are working to support government efforts to improving their living conditions in campsites, but the main priority and solution is to help people repair and rebuild their homes through shelter kits. It is important to take advantage of the fact that the majority of the family, in this case, they can return to their homes. Mindanao is known as the food bowl of the Philippines. With the devastation of vast tracts of agricultural products and lands, the impact of Pablo will be felt for a long time. Nearly 80% of households rely on subsistence farming for basic commodities such as banana, coconut, durian, and rice. For people living in eastern Mindanao, already one of the poorest areas in the country, the rehabilitation of agriculture and reestablishment of livelihoods are essential. With Pablo, we have the dangerous combination that houses and livelihoods were totally destroyed simultaneously. To meet the enormous needs, overcome challenges, and ensure best use of limited resources, effective coordination is vital. Coordination hubs have been in recent weeks established in Davao City, Nabunturan, Trento, and Catiel to strengthen the response. The cluster structure and coordination mechanism is working very effectively at national, regional, and now municipal levels and across sectors. Production of up-to-date information has been a sound and consistent response from international and national humanitarian partners, therefore meeting the fundamental requisite for good donorship. The recent heavy rains and floods have shown how vulnerable many of the communities affected by Pablo still are. The rising waters and threats of landslides has forced thousands of people to leave their homes again. Newly replanted crops have been lost and access to humanitarian work hampered. From previous emergency response experience in the Philippines, the Food Security and Agriculture Cluster negotiated with National Food Authority to withdraw food stock from any NFA depot within 24 to 38 hours to emergency and additional supplies of high-energy biscuits. This preparedness was invaluable during the response, and all the stock has been used. Second, and as important as fundraising, is a strong partnership with the government of the Philippines. I am very proud to see the work done over the last 7 weeks, and would like to commend the government for both the work in preparedness and in response. In this regard, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to all government leaders and also to local and national government staff members who have worked tirelessly and with such competence and purpose on this response. At every level, the President Aquino's calls to leave no one behind and build back better has been evident. I cannot finish without extending my heartfelt thanks to the humanitarian team in the Philippines, and also to all the colleagues that are working in this response. I could not be in better hands, more qualified and committed company than the UN agencies, the international and national NGOs, all working together with the government and local communities to help recover and rebuild from the devastation left behind by Pablo. We look forward to securing our presence in the affected areas because I have emphasized the devastation and need for support is immense. We really need your support to reach our goal and to remain in delivering a consolidated response at local level. Thank you very much for all your support.
Thank you, Luiza. And now I'd like to invite the Honourable Secretary Soliman to make a statement.
Thank you very much, David. Greetings to our colleagues on the table. Mr. Sonaji, may I also acknowledge Octavia and Luiza and David. To the diplomatic corps represented here, our partners and colleagues of the humanitarian agencies, both of the UN and the international NGOs, as well as the national NGOs, who I know are also represented here, colleagues in the government, with special mention to Assistant Secretary Ed Menyes, who was able to work with us very, very quickly on this. We acknowledge our colleagues in the Department of Foreign Affairs because we really thought that having it here is appropriate, and we thank you for the quick response that you came up to be able to hold this event here. As already mentioned by the speakers beforehand, this revised action plan is a welcome support for the government's effort in the early recovery and rehabilitation. We have been working closely with the humanitarian groups since day zero, both in the preparation and actual response. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge and say that the humanitarian organizations, as well as the international NGOs and national NGOs working with us in the early recovery and rehabilitation of Sendong, it was important and crucial for them to be with us for a whole year. And I'd like to say that part of the work there in relation to rehabilitation was to help prepare communities for their disaster risk reduction, as well as rebuilding lives in these communities. And because of the work that was done for over a year, or 1 year since December 17, 2012, I think we were able to show that if there is a thorough disaster risk reduction orientation in the levels of the villages to the level of the municipalities, we achieve zero casualty. In Cagayan de Oro and in Iligan, Typhoon Pablo did go through, and Typhoon Pablo resulted into the rising of the waters of the rivers, which also was the case during Typhoon Sendong. The water rose, as I was told, to the first floor level of a building, and yet we had zero casualty. Why? Because all of us, the government, both national and local, as well as the humanitarian agencies, the international NGOs, the Philippine NGOs, all work together to bring in the consciousness of disaster risk reduction, which resulted into zero casualty. This is the aim of the national government as well as the local government, together with the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council, to have the same intensity of preparation that was done in these two areas, so that we will have zero casualty in all of the events that's going to happen. climate change is here to stay. The changes of the pattern of the rains and the typhoon is such that it is moving down south. And I think this is very key in making sure that the preparations down south are even more intense, because as already mentioned, this is an area where they don't know what typhoon is. This is the area beneath the wind, as they call it. And that's why we have all of the plantations in these areas. But right now, we have to recognize patterns have changed, and therefore we need to look at the preparation even more closely. In relation to that, and also in the rehabilitation program, the President has instructed the Department of Environment and Natural Resources under the Mines and Geodetic Bureau, as well as the Department of Science and Technology through Project NOAA, to study very well, particularly Compostela Valley and Davao Oriental to begin with, and to the span of the eastern seaboard all the way to the Mindanao, northern Mindanao area, to study in a 50-year horizon, do simulations that will identify the vulnerable areas to flash flooding and to landslides, so that when we do plan for our rehabilitation and resettlement, it will now be informed with a 50-year horizon of what is vulnerable to flash floods and landslides. This is because we recognize that, as we already all know, climate change has made the pattern of the weather different from what we are all familiar with. And that's why we truly appreciate the support and the solidarity of the humanitarian agencies, the donor countries that have already come up and provided support. And this revised action plan will actually support the work of our partner UN agencies, as well as international NGOs who already are on the ground. As already indicated by Luiza, the cluster approach is well and alive at the level of the municipalities, where meetings and action, which I think is the most important thing, are actually done in a coordinated manner, where division of work is clear and we complement each other. When I say we, I mean the local government unit, and I must commend the province of Davao Oriental and Compostela Valley. Under great stress, they have been responding to, under the leadership of Governor Malanyaon and Governor Uy, they have been responding to the challenges of early recovery as they still deal with continuing floods and rains, and in some portions, landslides. And yet, because of the support of the national government agencies, and again, we are working in a very convergent manner, as well as the UN humanitarian agencies and the international NGOs and national NGOs working on humanitarian level, we have been able to alleviate the situation and condition in these areas. I just want to remind everyone that while everyone's focus is on Davao Oriental and Compostela Valley, and rightly so, because they are the most affected, there are provinces also affected in the Caraga region, as well as in Region 7 and parts of Region 6. And we're dealing with that. I mean, the national government is working on this with some of you, the humanitarian agencies. But the focus really is in these two provinces, which has had great devastation, both in life, in property, and in economic terms. So again, we would like to thank everyone in behalf of the national government and the local government units of the affected provinces, to the donors, to the humanitarian agencies, to the international NGOs and national NGOs, who continue to be there with us at the level of the municipality, having no very clear roof over their heads because most of the roofs have been blown off, and so we're working on tarps as roof, having to deal with having to look for potable water and potable water systems to put up. they are also there working with us as well as with the local government unit. So we want to acknowledge and thank especially your partners who are in the field for doing this with us. We believe by the end of January, the study of where vulnerability of landslide and flash floods will be determined already, and by the first 2 weeks of February, we will already be able to declare no-build zones as well as areas where the relocation sites can take place. After that, we can then fast-track settlements, infrastructure that will lend itself to a rehabilitation program that will ensure that we will have communities that are safe and that are not vulnerable to flash flood and landslides. Hopefully better lives and better communities for those who have been affected. As we saw, and the hope, I think, is there in the Sendong victims who are now in Calaanan, who are now in Indahang. These are the new communities, these are the new sites where they have better houses, livelihood, and better infrastructure because we were able to work together both at the local, the national, with the international humanitarian assistance and international NGOs. So once again, I echo not just the thanks but the appeal so that our partner NGOs, our partner humanitarian agencies from the UN will be able to continue their support to our efforts as government through this appeal that we are making. Again, once again, we thank the diplomatic corps who's here. We know you're all very, very busy, but your presence and your time is very much valued by us. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary Soliman. Now I'd like to open the floor to any questions that anyone might have for any of our panelists. Please, Norberto from Spanish Cooperation.
Thank you very much for inviting us to the Vice Bopha Action Plan for Recovery. On behalf of the Spanish ambassador, my ambassador Jorge Domecq, and the Spanish Coordinator General Vicente Sayes, we would like to extend also our sympathies to the victims, the Filipino people. My question mainly deals with security. I would like to know how's the security issue there in the affected areas, and how our local and international aid workers be protected of, let's say, crimes that be in the place where they're working.
Thank you for your question, Norberto. Right now, the situation of security is stable from the point of view of the experience in the last, since December. We acknowledge that two things can occur. There are areas there that are known to be conflict-affected areas. And in these conflict-affected areas, we have managed to work with international NGOs and National Red Cross, IFRC, ICRC, are mainly the groups that have been working together with the SWD, because we're the ones who have access to these areas. We see that there is no imminent danger to international aid workers as well as national aid workers for as long as they register and we know where they are and what they're working on. The second is that the Philippine military, together with the Philippine National Police, have been there with us from day zero. And the Philippine military has been very instrumental in ensuring that we actually reach the farthest. In the first 2 to 3 weeks of the work, we have been doing chopper drops. And the chopper drops involve actually going to areas that are supposed to be conflict affected. And so far, no incident, untoward incident has occurred. And I think everyone's focused on ensuring that those who need the food and those who need the help should get it, irregardless of where they belong, their ethnicity, their religion, their political views. So we have been working with that very closely. It cannot be avoided that there will be some groups who will manifest their frustration and manifest their desire to be attended to. And we have sat down and negotiated with all groups and have even increased the attention that we have to give in those areas. Maybe as a last point, what was really important is that all of those who are working, the international agencies as well as the national agencies, that we're all working with marked cars, with marked vests, so people know who you are and what you're doing there. Because once they know that you are working for the good of the people, that has been accepted. The local government unit is also working very closely with intelligence in relation to safety. Because again, we're aware that especially in Compostela Valley, these are conflict-affected areas. Davao Oriental has less, in fact has none. It's really in the Compostela Valley that we need to be more aware and to be more clear on who's doing what, and as I said, have marked vehicles and vests so people know who you are and what you're doing there.
Can I just compliment? We have a routine also implemented at local level. We do have a security debriefing every week, in the beginning of the week. We have a system of counting and reporting among the UN and the international and local NGOs that are associated. We have also a very speed mechanism of contacting and disseminating information when, if there is a need of sharing information in regard to security. And we are working close together. The point that made Secretary Soliman is very relevant. Our security will increase as long as we ourselves take very seriously what we are supposed to do in the description. Of course, we cannot deal with every event that can happen, but we do have provision that security communication is established. There is, since the beginning, a minimum of communication mechanism established, but we are increasing and improving the quality of the communication and also asking all NGOs and partners to carry on specified equipment that can run within the circuit of the communication material. So this is the mechanism that we also take in on our side.
I should not let it pass to thank the telcos, and all of the telcos. It's not just one, because they immediately restored. They even made the extra effort to bring in the communication very quickly. So this is Smart and Globe and Sun. So right now we are actually connected better as in the first week where the signals were all bad because, as you can imagine, their what do you call them? Their cell sites were all affected.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. If you could please announce your name and organization. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Larry. I'm representing my chief representative from Japan International Cooperation Agency. I just want to share some of the observations made by my colleagues who went to the site to check whether the relief items that were provided by the Japanese government were already distributed. One of the observations is that some of the local executives were hesitant to distribute the goods in a timely manner because there were not enough goods, that's number one. But they were also afraid that if not all can even attend, for example, they might face some political risk, especially that the coming election is forthcoming. I just want to share this, and I want to know whether the SWT is also looking into this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It is true. The local executives, if it is not going to provide for everyone, do not want to distribute immediately because it's going to cause more problems. This is true for tarpaulins and emergency materials for housing. That is not anymore occurring on food packs. In fact, the food packs, I think, are already, as we have seen as the donors who went there, have seen that it is more than enough. The cycle of distribution has stabilized. So what we are doing to address this, after the donor mission, we made a count of where we can still augment on the tarps because those are the most important item now. To date, the Philippine government has already spent more than $500 million pesos on relief and cash for work and for bank houses. To be exact, it's 558 million plus that we already have spent just on relief and on cash for work and bank houses. But the most important thing, I think, is that for the tarps to be distributed immediately, the donor community, you have come up with your tarps, it's not enough. And so what we do is to buy the tarps that is a gap and distribute that immediately. But we know that that is not going to provide much warmth and dryness because when the water just comes in from the rain, the tarps do not protect. And that's why we're fast-tracking the bunk houses. I know that the bunk houses can be expensive, but at this point, we cannot rebuild immediately because we're still waiting for the result of the study that's being done by DENR and DOST. So we do not encourage permanent rebuilding until the no-build zones are actually declared. Once the no-build zones are declared, then the planning for where the rehabilitation can be done will take place, which will be in the first week of Feb. Of course, once the no-build zones are also declared, the areas where you can still build, and there are houses there, emergency shelter kits will be distributed so that they can repair. In fact, in Compostela Valley, the provincial government had started giving out GI sheets just so that they can protect the families from the rain. So on that matter, on the tarps, we're fast-tracking giving out the tarps to areas that still need tarps.
Can I please just make acknowledgement of when the rain started, we tried to mobilize some donors so they could increase the tarps and support, and I really want to thank the donors that really attended to that call, and especially I would like to thank the Australia, the United States, and Switzerland and Sweden that they were able to really pull in with some resources just before we saw the rain season increase in its intensity. Thank you. In regard to housing.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Vladimir Hernandez. I'm from a Philippine-based NGO, Community and Family Services International, or CFSI. CFSI wish to commend the Philippine government for playing a strong and effective leadership role in this quite complicated humanitarian emergency, with evacuation and preparatory efforts even before the typhoon struck, followed by solid relief work immediately thereafter and onwards. Were it not for this leadership, many more would have died. In particular, CFSI would like to publicly commend the efforts of Secretary Soliman to reach out to the many, and there are many, local and national civil society actors who have both the willingness and capacity to play a helpful role in the response to this tragedy. Their contributions are not always picked up by the media or standard reporting processes, but have been and remain hugely significant. Secretary's inclusive approach has had a highly positive impact that bodes well for reconstruction and peace building in a part of the country that needs both. All that said, much more needs to be done and done now. We need the international community to rise to the occasion as far too many children, women, and men remain 7 weeks after the typhoon without shelter, sufficient food, adequate protection, and immediate livelihood opportunities. We likewise urge the various agencies of the Philippine government and both local and international humanitarian actors and donors to work shoulder to shoulder as one in these difficult times, echoing what Secretary Soliman said earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you. CFSI has been a long-standing partner of the government, especially the SWD, and we're working with them not just in Pablo but in central Mindanao and other conflict-affected areas. And so we encourage these partnerships, and these partnerships both at the national as well as in the local, because there are many NGOs and civil society organizations who operate just in these provinces, and their actual comparative advantage to all of us is they know the area as well as much of the communities that they work with and serve. So I think that that's really helped us reach many of these communities which otherwise even the local government units sometimes have difficulty reaching. So we do appreciate the partnership and we want to make it stronger.
Thank you, Secretary Soliman. And I think many UN agencies would also echo those sentiments, because the CSFI is indeed an implementing partner for many UN agencies. So thank you very much. I think we are coming up to, we start a little bit late. We're coming up to the 1 hour that was scheduled for this event. But maybe if there are any additional questions, either from the diplomatic community or our colleagues from the media at this stage. Questions. We would like to proceed with the next item on the agenda, which is a ceremony of recognition of support for those donors who supported the Mindanao Humanitarian Action Plan in 2012. So if I could kindly invite Secretary Soliman and Luiza to please come to the front of the podium. I would also like to invite representatives from Australia, the Central Emergency Response Fund, Japan, the Philippines, Spain, and the United States, please, to also come to the podium. So if you could start with Australia, and And the plaque is being received by Octavia Borthwick, the Minister Councillor of Onset. The next recipient of this award is Ms. Zola Dow with OCHA New York, receiving it on behalf of the Emergency Relief Coordinator and Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs of the United Nations, Valerie Amos, for the contributions given by the SURF. The next recipient of this award is Mr. Akiko Yonezawa, receiving on behalf of the Embassy of Japan. On behalf of the government of the Philippines, we would like to invite Assistant Secretary Eduardo Meñez. On behalf of Spain, we'd like to invite Norberto to receive this recognition. And on behalf of the United States, Ms. Gloria Steele. Yes, if we can have all those who received the award, please join Secretary Soliman and Luiza at the front here for a photo opportunity.
Yes.